In Connecticut, myself and my partner, Mike Grabowski, have seized about almost $4 million in victim assets in recovery. But that's about 10% recovery rate. So we're losing about 90% of that because of delayed reporting and other reasons.
Welcome in, everybody. You're listening to Wrestling Payments, a podcast where we help payment professionals contend with the challenges of modernizing their payments operations and identifying ways to build for the future. If you're interested in payments innovation and modernization, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into it.
Hi, we have a special episode of Wrestling Payments here at the Payments Management Conference. I'm just sitting here for a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to slide over to the other side of the camera and let these guys take it away. Could you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure.
I'm Ryan McKinnon. I'm with South Shore Bank. I am in fraud operations. I've been in banking for 16 years, done a little bit of everything. But where I, find my passion is that, investigative side of things, and I've done BSA, and fraud obviously ties so closely together with that, and that's where I find myself now, because for me, it's one of those things that you can make an impact on somebody's day. So that's little about me. I'm also the co-chair of NEACH's fraud committee, so we deal with a lot of the educational directives, developing sessions for things like PMC or the fraud forum in June, and even some of the stuff you see in member meetings as well. So that's a little about me.
Thanks.
Matt Hogan. I'm a detective with the Connecticut State Police. I'm a task force officer with the United States Secret Service's Financial Crimes Task Force. And we do everything. A general detective, but I do specialize in white collar and cryptocurrency investigations for us.
So I've been here just a couple of days, and I've listened to both of you kind of talk within sessions, just regular sessions, fraud sessions. Can you talk a little bit about your session?
Yeah, so Matt and I are doing a session together because, from my side of things, the financial institution side, we see the red flags. We see, the fallout from a client who's experienced a loss, who's been victimized by a scam. And as FIs, we don't always get to see the other side of things of what Matt does. So I think, to bring unique situation scenarios, especially with Matt's crypto knowledge, that's where a lot of our session will focus now, because that's, I feel like, a very big fraud avenue now. So to have him in that discussion and to enlighten our side of the equation on what you guys do, what you guys need, and how that translates to people being held accountable for victimizing people who've been stealing their hard-earned money.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the FIs and law enforcement don't communicate really well, obviously. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of really bridge that gap and talk about what we see from your perspective and vice versa, because a lot of times we'll go off of SARS even, and no one really talks about what happens after those are written, which is a huge deal. Obviously, I know financial institutions are always questioning what happens after the fact, because we don't call and go, hey, thanks for that great job on that SAR. It was fantastic. So I think that's a really important subject for everybody to know on their side of the house, because we don't do that reach out afterwards. So we're going to hit on a lot of topics that we're seeing. Obviously, crypto is a huge vehicle right now for laundering money. So we're going to touch on kiosks and pig butchering and all other kinds of frauds we're seeing. So hit it all.
So super interesting. I have questions for both of you. So I'm going to start with you, Matt. Matt, you mentioned some initials yesterday. There's an organization, association that you belong to that works on this sort of thing.
Yeah, so, there's a lot of organizations. So IAFCI is one of them, International Association of Financial Crime Investigators. It's a mouthful, but I work on their committees as well. I'm on the planning board committee for the Connecticut chapter. I'm also on the board for ACAMS Connecticut. So we're trying to touch that everywhere with crypto, because it's everywhere now and everyone's kind of curious about what it is and how it works. But we're doing a lot with the crypto on the state side now too, because we were so feet to the fire with it. Now we're actually embedded with the Department of Banking, working with them hand in hand with a lot of this, because we needed that civil aspect from our criminal aspect, because there's so much that happens on both sides of the house. We didn't have that opportunity, so now we do.
And Ryan, what are you seeing? So we have a survey from the payment associations going out. the survey, and it's a fraud survey. This one is to see, is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? Can you comment on that? And of course, not from your institution's perspective.
Right. Just in general, the fraud landscape, I feel like, 2020 really kind of changed a lot of stuff. It brought a lot of new opportunities, a lot of new wrinkles, you talk about, the PPP and EIDL fraud that happened during that time frame. That's when check washing started to really kind of rear its ugly head again, because check washing is something we all deal with every day. And it's, we've all heard about it at different conferences and workshops, but it's an old school thing. It's not like there's some like brand new thing. And that's honestly what fraud is. It's not that it's getting worse. It evolves and it's cyclical. What is hot right now, we as financial institutions put so much focus on preventing that because that's what's in the here and now. And the fraudsters will dip off a little bit, because you think about that from a card perspective and how hot debit card fraud it was, and then now the EMV chip is supposed to fix everything. Right. It fixed in person. Now it's just a shift to online fraud, and instead with that. So
fraudsters always learn. They evolve 10 steps ahead of us every time. Exactly.
And that's the constant battle, is making sure that we're only staying a couple of steps behind and not letting them get so far ahead.
And I've gone to many conferences where the fraud story from the financial institution perspective comes up, and it's just horrifying. Can you brighten my day and give me some wins? Is there anything you could share?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of case dependent, obviously. When it comes to a lot of the cryptocurrency investigations we do, unfortunately, time is of the essence with those. So delayed reporting hampers a lot of those successes. I will say that in Connecticut, myself and my partner, Mike Grubowski, have seized about almost $4 million in victim assets in recovery. But that's about 10% recovery rate. So we're losing about 90% of that because of delayed reporting and other reasons. But also on the other side of the coin is the prosecution aspect. And we don't have a lot of wins there because a lot of these are overseas frauds perpetrated overseas, everywhere from the laundering all the way down to the actual phone calls. So there's not a lot of in the U.S. So what we try to do is go after the mules a lot of times. And there's also a problem with that. Where are they witting or unwitting, right? Are we dealing with another victim of a romance scam? How do we prove that? Will the prosecution even accept the case in the first place? So we have a lot of trouble with frauds in general. So I will say we have had a really good set of cases where we have arrested mules because we were able to prove without a doubt that they were laundering money on behalf of themselves, taking profits, and it was very obvious what they were doing. But by and large, most of them were romance scam victims, unfortunately.
I have a bunch of questions for you on now. So when those cases are filed or in the courts, federal, state, where do they live?
It depends. So I have the luck, I guess, of kind of going on both sides of the house. I can take them state or federal because of my TFO position. So if the state doesn't take them, a lot of times I will try and take them federal, but it has to be obviously appetizing in some capacity for them because they are so inundated with casework. So dollar amounts have to matter, or there has to be some kind of hot button topic, whether it's elder, they're 65 plus or something like that, or if there's some other extenuating circumstances that make it more attractive for them to want to take. Stateside, it's the same problem. What we wind up doing is we take everything the feds don't take, and dollar amount wise, and then we get really inundated because that's a wide swath of, it could be anywhere from $7,000 we heard this morning all the way to six figures. So that broad gap is difficult for us to handle because there's no specialization for financial crime investigators a lot of times in most agencies. If the agency does have that, they're very lucky, but most don't.
And so Ryan, I know you're a Massachusetts institution,
yep,
and you're in Connecticut. When hypothetically Ryan reports to his local police, or actually I'll just lead that in. What is the process? Can he expect a case to be solved by reporting it to his local jurisdiction? How does it flow?
No, I wouldn't say should expect that because you don't know where it's going to go. Any small case could actually be a big case after you start following the trail of money, right? It could be one mule taking to 3 or 4 more mules, making it $1 million case. So we don't know. And the time frames of these cases are obviously astronomical. None of them are solved in like TV, 30-minute sessions, not going to solve it. Most of our cases are, several months up to a year. I'm working a case on the retail fraud side. That's almost 2 years. So they go a long time depending on where it comes. I have crypto Ponzi scheme case. It's almost 2 years, a year and a half right now. But there's just so much. And then you start getting reports from other banks and other institutions. We have to ingest that data and try and follow it. It's just, we don't know. And again, that's the part of that communication thing. Like, he doesn't know that unless we call and tell him that either. So they're like sitting there twiddling their thumbs, what's happening.
Right.
We don't do that. So.
And I don't want to say you rock my world, but I watch a lot of Law and Order. So it's not solved in one.
It sucks. No, it's not 30 minutes. I wish it was, believe me, but no.
Excellent. Ryan, we were talking earlier, and can you talk a little bit about your path? One of the things NEACH focuses on is education, and we just remodeled around schools of training. Can you talk about just your personal career and how it progressed?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up around banking because both my dad and my stepmom are both in the industry. So I was fortunate enough that, during college, I worked in an institution. I started doing online banking support and debit card fraud related items. I mean, I helped that bank, in their launching of their online banking platform, back then too, and the mobile app it was.
It's cool.
So and I really kind of started to like the investigative aspect that came along with some of the things you would see with these debit card disputes, and that's when I went out to get my first real big boy job. And, I found a position at a community bank in Newton, and there was a BSA role, and so I was going to be able to kind of take that investigative aspect that I really liked and kind of carry it further. And I did 10 years in BSA, five as an analyst, 5 as a BSA officer. And I found that for me, it was, more and more as time went on, fraud was becoming so much more. I don't know whether it's become more prevalent or whether it's, the detection's gotten better or what it, truly is. But, fraud was intersecting more with my life day to day. And that's really where I, like I said off the top, found that passion, because for me, having that client interaction, having that ability to impact somebody's day, makes a difference for me. And that's what's led me to be part of NEACH's fraud committee. That's part of the initiatives that we're working on at South Shore right now. Myself and Joe Antulli, who is our community relations officer, have been going out to local communities, speaking on with seniors and talking about how do they arm themselves against these different frauds and scams out there, because we do a great job. Our marketing team's fantastic. They do a lot in terms of engagement with Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, definitely pushing out a lot of not just product content, stuff involved in us involved in the community, but also just awareness items, whether it be through those, whether it be on our webpage, things like that. But the seniors aren't always on that. They might not be accessible. So that's where we've taken that piece of things, and that's been such a great exposure and networking opportunity, and that's where coming to things like this, and connect. I've had met Matt before, but I feel like over the last couple of days, I've connected a lot more with him, and then even other like-minded people at different institutions, that. Sometimes you need to be able to get in touch with a real person on the other end, when you're working a fraud case, to be able to actually recover money. And if you don't have a contact, sometimes that's tough to do. So
passport case.
Exactly. So taking opportunities like this coming to PMC really can make not just expanding your knowledge from the sessions, but also the interpersonal stuff you get from it too.
Excellent. So let's jump back to your session for a minute. Anything you want to talk about your session? Things people should remember? Things people should look into? Did you have it yet?
No, it's tomorrow.
So, as a prep,
yeah. I mean,
what is it? What's your session?
It's going to be on fraud and the intelligence, the new fraud trends that we're seeing between the both of us. So, we're covering such a broad swath of things. We're kind of just going to hit all the hot topics that everybody knows about, just kind of going in depth of what we're seeing. But I guess the takeaway would probably be, be aware that the frauds aren't really changing, right? Like you're still dealing with the money mules, you're still dealing with romance scams. Instead of wire transfers, they're now using crypto, right? Or they're modifying the vehicle of transport of money as opposed to what it used to be. So I think that's the takeaway, is like, don't think that the frauds are really changing. They're all the same. They've just are moving with times and just think slightly more enhanced. They're using AI now, obviously, for a lot of that stuff too, like the session today.
Exactly.
So,
And I mean, the way that I look at fraud, as you said, like fraud's not necessarily changing. You have the same core elements to every type of fraud or scam. You know, there's a problem or there's a prize. They create a sense of urgency. They ask you to pay in a specific way. You know, they all have that same thing. You know, but it's like I can sing a song as a pop song. I can sing it as a country song. You know, I can sing it R&B. It's all the same thing. Like, I'm singing the same lyrics, but it's in a different manner. So whether, you know, you have a romance scam or a job scam, you know, and what they use in terms of tactics and vehicles.
I mean, Frank Abagnale was doing check frauds, 40 years ago.
Exactly.
They're still doing it now.
Exactly. So, you know, that really nothing's changing with it. It's just an evolution of how it's done.
So, last question for me, and then you can add anything you like. The unwitting mule. What 5 tips would you tell someone to realize that someone's making you a mule?
I mean, first is, it's too good to be true. It probably is, right? I mean, that's always been true so far, it seems like. Investments with low risk are probably high risk, right? There's no such thing when we're dealing with these scams, unfortunately. And if you've never met the person in person, you're probably not talking to a real person.
Exactly. And you know, the caveat to that is in person, like you and I are here today, not in person that you FaceTime or Skype, because as we talked about, you know, a moment ago with AI, you know, the technology has evolved with being able to, you know,
e-meeting doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, you know, 10 years ago, that was a different story though. I mean, that 10 years ago, I would feel a lot better about, oh, you Skyped with them, you FaceTime with them. Oh, that's great. Like that makes me feel a lot better as a financial institution, you know, but now, you know, with the evolution of technology, I can't trust it anymore. You know, that, you know, they said they saw them, but the picture was kind of funny. They can blame that on some sort of connection issue, or, you know, the image was dark. You know, my roommate's sleeping, and, you know, I don't want to disturb them. But yeah, hey, I'm on with you. You know, it's an evolving landscape.
And don't be afraid to report it though either. That's the biggest problem we have, is most, at least on the more senior side of the house, not so much the, I guess, you know, 40s, 30s aren't necessarily as scared to report it, but seniors definitely are scared to report it. And I mean, for many reasons. I mean, they don't want to lose their ability to pay. They don't want to get those rights taken away from them. They're just scared in general, embarrassed. So we see a lot of that. So, I mean, I think it's good for community and regional banks, because you guys have that like person-to-person contact, whereas, you know, the big banks of the world don't really have that anymore, or they've removed the brick and mortar. And I think that is a big problem down the road for what we're talking about. So knowing that if you were a victim, don't be afraid to report it. You know, don't be embarrassed. I've talked to 1 million victims at this point, and we've heard every story you can think of. So, you know, if you are a victim, don't be afraid to report it.
And that's something that, you know, I definitely take in my own personal approach is, you know, a lot of these people, as you said, they're either ashamed, they feel stupid because now they're able to sit back and play Monday morning quarterback. But when they're wrapped into these situations, these fraudsters are professionals. They're good at what they do. You know, and that's one thing I try and hammer home with them. Like, you're not the first person this happened to. You're not going to be the last. You know, so what you need to take away from this is, how do you not become a victim again, and how can you share that information with those around you? How do you get comfortable with the situation with yourself, and to be able to share that information, so those around you maybe fall into the same trap. Because if we aren't talking about it, you know, with the consumer end of things, then nothing's going to change. Because, you know, we can have all these great fancy softwares, we can do so much internal training and do all that, but until you change, you know, how the general consumer is thinking about things, that's where this, you know, battle, you know, against the fraudsters really starts to shift.
Yeah, and the front office really needs to recognize that too, especially with the training part, because I think a lot of times they're so in the mode of business, you know, how can I help you, blah blah blah, but they forget to be a human a lot of times too, and you lose on those cues from other potential victims or whoever. So I think having that human connection where remove yourself from being that business person is really important too a lot of times, because they'll probably more likely open up to you. Like if I'm sitting there as, Joe Cop with my uniform on, you're not going to want to talk to me as tightly as if I was just like relaxed and easygoing and maybe, dressed more casually. You're probably going to want to talk to me more easily than some ridiculous uniform that we wear.
Excellent. Anything else, guys? This was great. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
Excited for the conference.
Excited for the session tomorrow. I've talked to a handful of people. Joe in the room. I'm like, oh, you're gonna come to my session tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, yeah, we're coming. I'm like, I didn't just guilt you into that, right? And they're like, no, honestly, it seems like there'll be some good engagement around it. Just like there was a lot of good engagement around the pre-conference workshop yesterday.
I don't know who came up with this. The combination's really good. It's not just a banker. It's not just a law enforcement.
It's needed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of NEACH, your trusted resource in payments, and our guests, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about payments innovation and modernization, you can find the Wrestling Payments Podcast on the podcast page of NEACH.org or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just search for Wrestling Payments in your podcast app. Thanks for listening.